Okay. Dr. Umar Abdullah Johnson is a nationally certified school psychologist. He specializes in working with at-risk, violent, suicidal, and depressed African-American boys and girls. For 5 years, he served as the youngest of 5 African-American male school psychologists in the 5th largest public school district in America, District of Philadelphia. Umar has received commendations for his volunteer work throughout the Pan-African community and has been a featured guest on various Black talk shows throughout the United States. He's a writer, political scientist, and consultant to families, educators, mental health professions, and charter schools throughout the country. He currently hosts a psycho-educational community lecture series at the African American Museum in Philadelphia. We all know that he is a Garveyite to heart. He also is a descendant of Frederick Douglass. So all throughout his time, he has no other choice but to be a freedom fighter at heart. And I can say so much more, but y'all had enough of hearing me. And so he's going to come up in a minute, but we're just going to take just like a 5 or 10 for him to finish his food before he comes up. And I'm asking that you please just go and patronize the vendors that are in the back. There's some lovely soaps and shea butter that's going on, as well as t-shirt. If you need to relax, we also have massage therapy over there in the back. There's also some vegan food, alkaline food that heals the body, as well as for my heart lovers, soul food lovers, there's also some soul food and some desserts by Paul. If we're from Long Beach, y'all know how Paul get down. We also have jewelry over there from Lynette Hodge. And DVDs. That's right, DVDs, Brother Shabazz. Get the information because it's out there. And also, Brother Umar also have his DVDs over there as well. So for 5 to 10 minutes, just go ahead, patronize. Again, we have to support each other. If we don't build economically together, then we're going to stay in the rut that we're in. So 5 to 10 minutes, and we'll come back.
Here in Long Beach, New York. I didn't know there was a Long Beach, New York. When I put on Facebook and Twitter that I would be speaking in Long Beach, a lot of my California brothers and sisters said, "What's the address?" And I had to tell them, this is Long Beach, New York. I never heard of it either. So I'm just going to have to drive out there and see where it is. So it's an honor to be here. New York and New Jersey are one of my biggest support bases, along with Chicago, Atlanta, South Florida. I get a lot of love here, and I'm glad that I'm here in Long Beach, and I'm sure it's not the last time. Normally I come to a place once, and after that I never stop coming. So I'm hoping it's going to be the same case here. Martin Luther King Rec Center, how fitting. Although I'm a Garveyite and a Pan-Africanist, I have tremendous respect for the late Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and what he did. He was not perfect. He made mistakes. We will all make them. But the bottom line is that man gave his life for the improvement of black people, and that's more than what many people who criticize him can say. So we have to be very careful about criticizing. We do need to make an assessment so we don't repeat errors that were made previously. None of our ancestors should be deified. They must all be assessed so that we can take what is good and learn from the mistakes as well. Before we leave here today, make sure you get my business card. They're on the back table. If we run out, I have some more in my bag and some more in the trunk. So there's enough for everyone. Also, I have some DVDs back there, and I'm going to quickly tell you what they are, because at the end of my lecture, when I'm fellowshipping with brothers and sisters, people always want to get my attention so I can describe what exactly is on the table. Baby Mama Drama television show. That's one of my classic DVDs. That's a TV show that we did in Philadelphia. Real mothers and real fathers with issues raising the children together. Child support court, custody, restraining orders. These are real people with real cases. The expert panel includes myself, a judge, social worker, attorney, a bunch of professionals who are in the whole custody game. And we help these parents work through the various issues that they have. That's an actual TV show that was aired in Philadelphia. That's back there. That's a classic. Also back there is the 7 Deadly Sins, one of my most popular nationwide. A lecture that I did in Muskegon, Michigan, when I break down the 7 major strategies that the American social order uses to keep the black black community disorganized, including abortion, mass incarceration, economic castration, chemical dependence, miseducation, police brutality, and I'm missing 2 others. Also on the 7 Deadly Sins DVD is a presentation on secret societies and the white supremacy think tanks that actually dictate the economic order globally. So there's 2 lectures on there. Can't remember everything. Some of the new stuff is the psychosexual war against black children, a television interview that I did in New Orleans about a month ago. Also there is the televised debate between myself and the black, lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgendered population. I wasn't there physically, but clips of my statements that I made are strategically placed within the debate. So I am debating, I'm just not in the flesh, because they probably wouldn't have showed up. So you get to see their arguments against my position, which is that this particular behavior, homosexuality, comes from a European cultural frame of reference, and it is not African in any way, shape, or form. So that's a very good one for those who are on the fence as to whether or not you believe you should support that type of behavior or not. And also, I want to make sure that I'm clear in talking about the homosexual war against our children, that we are separating the behavior from the African who commits it. I want to be clear about that, because there are some very reactionary forces out there who would say we should go out and slaughter everyone who is infected with sexual confusion. I don't necessarily endorse that view, because if you start slaughtering them, you're going to end up slaughtering relatives, and most of us would not willingly kill our own people, so there would be bias and there would be favoritism in such a campaign. But even more importantly, a lot of our children who are infected with sexual confusion, if we're going to go out slaughtering people who are sexually confused, we're going to have to kill black babies, and that is not something that we've ever stood for as African people. I am of the position that a lot of our children can be healed. They can be rehabilitated. They can be treated. Can they be cured? You don't cure any mental illness. You teach people how to manage and control. So I would never argue that you can cure. You don't cure depression. You don't cure schizophrenia. You don't cure anxiety. You teach people to manage it. So in our young people, many of whom have been sexually victimized by blood, by the way, we have to make sure that we do all we can to rescue them. What else? Military science, the 44 laws of black power, the presentation that I did in New York City, December 18th, with the gathering of the young masses. Master that's back there. Psychoacademic War Against Black Boys, Part 1, classic interview from Chicago. That's the DVD that pretty much brought me into people's homes. It's a lot of stuff back there. But, you know, if you have any questions, just let me know. You can also order them from our website. Most of them. I'm so busy that I don't get a chance to put all the new stuff up. So if you want something new, you might want to get it now. It should be up in about a month or 2. So let's get right into it. What I want to do to start out with today is I want to talk about the psychological evaluation. The school psychological evaluation. Why do I want to talk about the school psychological evaluation? I want to talk about it because too many of us are getting our children evaluated unnecessarily, and we're not conscious of the repercussions that come as a result of giving white school psychologists the right to label our children's problems as disabilities and disorders. Whenever you sign a permission to evaluate form, you're giving the school district the power to tell you why the child isn't learning. You're giving them the power to tell you why they can't sit still. You're giving them the power to define your child's reality. One thing you have to understand about psychology, one thing you have to understand about this book, the DSM-4, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. This book in American culture is more powerful than the Bible. It's more powerful than the Constitution. It's more powerful than the Declaration of Independence, because this book determines what behaviors are normal and which ones are abnormal. This book determines how you can behave and how you cannot. A group of white psychiatrists literally sit in a room and they vote on whether or not they think a particular disorder should be included in this book. Psychology and psychiatry are children of the eugenics movement. The eugenics movement was a late 19th century phenomenon which was based on the belief that white people were biologically and intellectually superior to Africans. And although they were biologically and psychologically superior to Africans, they had to deal with the fact that these so-called inferior black people were genetically superior. That's the contradiction of eugenics. If you are superior to me, why is my DNA more powerful than yours? So they came up with the conclusion that the best way to protect the superior race, allegedly, white folk, from being contaminated by Africans was to systematically exterminate the African and systematically overpopulate the European. It's no coincidence that you're seeing a rapid rise in twin, triplet, quadruplet, sextuplet white births. Because many of those women are being influenced to take fertility drugs. So they're having 8 and 10 children at a time. And at the same time, what are we doing in our community? We're systematically exterminating our children through abortion. And for those who don't know, Planned Parenthood International, the same Planned Parenthood that lobbied in 1972 that homosexuality be taken out of this book. Because homosexuality was a mental illness for all of American history up until they took it out. The first time you did not see it included in this book was April of 1974, the year that I was born. Up until April of 1974, it was an illness. Fast forward to 2012. Fast forward to 2012. There's another illness in this book. It's called pedophilia. Sexual attraction in relations with children before the age of puberty, younger than 13. That's what's happening right now as you sit here. A group of psychiatrists in the American Psychiatric Association are debating the removal of pedophilia from that book. There's a group of mental health experts who believe that it should not be considered a sickness for a man to have sex with a child. If you don't believe me, let me give you a website for those of y'all who have pens. I want you to go to this website. It's called the North American Association for Man and Boy Love. I'm going to say it again. The North American Association for Man and Boy Love. NAAMBL.com or .org. They are one of the chief lobbyists who are fighting to get pedophilia taken out of this book. They are of the position that men cohabitating with boys goes all the way back into their history, and they are correct. The problem is it doesn't go back in our history. One of the reasons we have so much confusion with black people having to decide whether you need to be pro or con the homosexual war is because you fail to recognize cultural genocide and cultural imperialism when you see it. For a European to argue that it should be okay for our men to molest our boys because we've been doing this since 1000 BC is possibly tolerable from their cultural frame of reference. It is intolerable for yours. From a Greco-Roman perspective, many of their great men behaved in same-gender sex, which we call sexual confusion. Julius Caesar, Napoleon, Plato, Aristotle, Socrates, nearly every last one of the philosophers. And why? Because Greco-Roman culture was an anti-female culture. In fact, many of the sadistic sexual behaviors that are so popular, even in our neighborhood today, grew as a result of Greco-Roman culture. Their total disdain for the woman. So they did things to her to totally humiliate her because they believed she was less than. We got to understand that. Now, from an African standpoint, you don't even have a word for same-sex relations, nowhere on the continent. You're talking about the oldest people on earth, no word, no concept to explain woman-woman, man-man relations. So we got to make sure we understand this when we speak out against it. Okay? Very important that we do that, because a lot of us are not well read in our contemporary history, and you have to start doing some reading in your contemporary history. We're really good with ancient Africa. We could talk about anything that happened 5,000 years ago, but we can't talk about anything that happened 50 years ago. So culturally we're intelligent, politically we're retarded. And so what I want to do today is raise your political IQ. Because, as Amos Wilson taught us, it's when things look better that you should be concerned that they're getting worse. White supremacy's genius lies in the fact that it's constantly and consistently outthinking us. The Obama election was a case study in how white supremacist ideology was able to outthink black people. And now your so-called first black president has a homosexual agenda to make that behavior totally accepted in your neighborhood before he leaves office. And this is who you tell your sons to look up to, because your political IQ is low. Obama was chosen to be president 4 years before you even knew his name. Presidents are chosen 4 years in advance, and you don't choose them. Whether you go out to the polls in November or not is irrelevant from a presidential standpoint. Now, when you're voting for your mayor, city council, governors, that's a direct election. The presidency is not a direct election. The United States Constitution, if you read it, clearly tells you that the Electoral College chooses presidents, not the people. No people in American history has ever chosen a president, nor will they ever. But you've had examples in American history where the people chose President A and the bankers chose President B. Al Gore, George W. Bush, the election of 2000, the first one of this century and millennium. The white people chose Al Gore, but the bankers chose George Bush. Al Gore had 3 million more popular votes than George Bush, but George Bush got the White House because he had 2 more electoral college votes. This information is important, not so we can immerse ourselves within the American political milieu so that we can educate our children in how not to fall for the political religion of America. On the back of this book, the DSM, is a picture of a man, Benjamin Rush. His face is on the back of the DSM, has been, and shall forever be. He's the first president of the American Psychiatric Association. He was dean of medicine at Pennsylvania Hospital in Philadelphia. He's a signer of the Declaration of Independence and the first president of the American Psychiatric Association. He used to diagnose slaves with a disease in slavery called nigritude. Nigritude was a psychological illness that led the African brain to be totally useless, contaminated, feeble-minded. He told white people that they should not rub up against black people because if you could, our skin was contagious and you could catch nigritude by rubbing up against black skin. That was a real psychiatric diagnosis. There was another diagnosis called drapetomania. Drapetomania is a diagnosis that came out of New Orleans, Louisiana. Dr. Cartwright, a psychologist and medical doctor who used to diagnose enslaved Africans with drapetomania. Drapetomania was a disease known as freedom. In other words, if you were an enslaved African who wanted to run away from your master, you were considered to have an illness. That illness was drapetomania. Freedom was your sickness. The belief that you had a right to be free was a sickness. Why am I giving you this? Because you need to understand that the job of psychiatry from a racial oppressive position is to do what? Demonize, marginalize any behavior that the system considers a threat coming from black people to be pathological. That's the job of psychology. In fact, when you go back to the 1960s, you'll find that many brothers and sisters who participated in the Black Power movement were arrested in mental hospitals and diagnosed with schizophrenia. Nothing was wrong with them, but they used schizophrenia to keep them off the street and out of the struggle. Why? Because mental incarceration is worse than criminal incarceration. If you go to jail, allegedly, you have a right to a representation, an attorney, and you have a right to a jury of your peers, allegedly. If you get arrested, if you are 302-504 into a mental hospital here in Long Beach because somebody said you was crazy. You don't have a right to an attorney, and you don't have a right to a jury trial. And every mental health hospital in America has a judge assigned to it. You need to know this. And the reason there's a judge assigned to every mental health hospital in America because every hospital is a prison. Why am I saying this? Because many of us are letting our sons, daughters too, but particularly the boys, black and Hispanic, African, both, to be diagnosed with ADHDs and conduct disorders and disruptive behavior disorders and oppositional defiant disorders and intermittent explosive disorders because you fail to recognize that in America, in most states, you can be arrested and held against your will if you have been diagnosed with a condition, prescribed the medication, and refuse to take it. I know families right now who don't have their children anymore because somebody said, let him get tested. Somebody said, let her get tested. Let the psychologist spend some time with them. Give them an evaluation. I'm telling you that the psychological evaluations for African children is a highway to a destroyed life. And you know what's, so sad? Even though the school is hustling our children, and even though the mental health establishment is hustling our children, and even though the juvenile incarceration centers are hustling our children, we are also hustling our children. Parents love special education diagnoses. You love ADHD diagnoses. You love psychiatric medication prescriptions. Why? Number one, it gives you an excuse not to take responsibility for the problem the child got. All right. That's number one. When I was growing up as a child, ADHD didn't hit yet. So there was no excuse. Parents had to be on their job, and we were. But we allowed the white think tank of psychology and psychiatry to come up with man-made labels and disorders that we also conveniently use to avoid parental responsibility. For example, the reading disability. 75% of all special education referrals in America are for reading disabilities. Here's the problem though. 40% of children will struggle learning how to read the first time. 40 will struggle significantly. Another 40 won't struggle significantly, but they're still going to struggle. It's going to take them a little while to get it. Only 20% will pick it up the first time. So if we know most children will have some type of struggle in learning to read, who decides whether this particular child is going to get extra help or be sent straight to the psychologist for a learning disability diagnosis? Do you know what the difference is? The difference is a parent or teacher who cared enough to go the extra mile and those who didn't feel like it. Most of the children in special education across this country, black or brown, most of them are there because they have been victimized by inferior school systems that could care less about getting them up on grade level, and they simply throw them in special education because there's a double benefit there. They're no longer responsible for teaching them because now everybody believes there's something wrong with them, and they make money on top of it. See, whenever I test your children and put them in special education, the school gets money.
Yeah, all the time.
Special education is a hustle.
Yeah.
It is a business. Yeah. It is a con game.
Right.
I want y'all to be clear.
Yeah.
I go to one of these schools in Long Beach and I test your child and I say he's learning disabled because you ain't want to work with him a little bit more. Okay? He's learning disabled because he's been bounced around to too many schools. He's learning disabled because he has a middle-class European-American female teacher who really didn't want to get stuck in that district in the first place, but she decided to stay because she was told that if she stayed in the ghetto and helped the poor black kids, they're going to pay off all her student loans in 3 years.
All right.
So you send the child to me, And I see that he can learn quickly. He can learn well. The problem is the ABT. What does ABT stand for? Ain't been taught. Most of the kids in special ed ain't been taught. And you know they ain't been taught. And then you get some trifling black parents who put their kids in special ed knowing nothing is wrong with them because they don't want to see them repeat. I don't want my son to get left down, so I'm going to put him with an IEP. What does IEP stand for? Inferior Education Plan. That's what it is. Put a black Latino boy in special education. In the 5th grade, he got 7 more years until 12th. I'm willing to bet 75% of the time he will not be able to read, write, or do math on grade level by the time he graduates. But according to special ed law, he must graduate because we are not allowed to discriminate against children with disabilities. Look how this works now. Because somebody gave an opinion that he couldn't learn as well as his classmates. He's just going to get pushed through school, graduate, regular diploma, but now he's what? Functionally illiterate. Special education is the #1 cause of functional illiteracy in the black community. At least 50% of all functionally illiterate adults were special education students. And because there's no accountability in special ed, because we refuse to organize ourselves, the school know they don't have to prove that it works. They don't have to prove that they're spending that extra money on your child because you're not going to ask them. Which is why I'm hoping that those of you here in Long Beach, parents and non-parents, organize yourselves so you can bring change in the schools long enough for us to build our own. Because I want to be clear. This is not just a fight to get them to properly educate our children. It's not going to happen. It goes against the logic of white supremacy. White supremacy is based on controlling and maintaining the superior position of Europeans vis-a-vis everybody else here. A proper education destabilizes white privilege. A proper education destabilizes white privilege. So if you think that a middle-class white woman will properly educate a black child so they can rival their own child for the last spot at Harvard, you're out of your mind. It's not going to happen. You have to teach your children. See, education is like psychology. When I sit down to do therapy with a child or an adult, my education, my degrees, none of that is relevant. The only thing that matters in that room for those 55 minutes is whether I can establish a trusting relationship with the client. Period. Education don't mean nothing. Years on the job don't mean nothing. None of that mean anything. Can I establish a relationship? Guess what? In the field of education, it is exactly the same thing. The closest thing to a therapist is a teacher. That means what? That if the teacher can establish a trusting relationship with the pupil, they can't teach it. The problem is, when we look at the failure of black boys, with only 1 out of every 4 black boys getting a high school diploma in America, with only 3 out of every 100 black babies born ever going to college, we've been taught to look at the boy as the problem. He is responsible for his own failure. Since when were children responsible for their own failure? Up until the 20th century, adults were always responsible. But now, the child, the victim, is responsible. Nobody's talking about the fact that there's a significant cultural gap between the educator and the educated. Nobody's talking about the fact that the education that they get is totally irrelevant. Nobody's talking about the fact that a black boy in America is 4 times as likely to be diagnosed as retarded as a white one and 4 times less likely to be diagnosed as mentally gifted. No other people would allow their children to be subjected to what we allow ours to be subjected to. And then we got a nerve to get upset with our children when they stop going. I'm no supporter of high school dropout, but from a logical position, I understand it. You're asking me to go somewhere every day for 180 days and subject myself to humiliation, mistreatment, and anti-education, expulsion, suspension, and we now know that many of America's public schools are the #1 referral source for new prison inmates. They are locking them up in school and taking them straight to the jail, and you wonder why he don't want to go. The problem ain't the child. The problem is you. Children don't fall far from trees. The apples don't fall far from trees. I'm tired of people saying what's wrong with our children. What's wrong with our children?
All right.
Us. It's not them, it's us. So let's go through the evaluation. First of all, there's 5 reasons you want to get a child tested. Number 1, to gain information you don't already know. That's important. Make this common sense, but I got to say this again. Why am I saying you should only get a child tested to gain information you don't already know? Because some of us are getting our children tested when we already know what's wrong. Let me give you an example. You have a 12-year-old little girl. You're not with her father anymore. Or for the man, you're not with her mother anymore. It could go either way. Y'all having issues. And one of y'all using the child as a weapon against the other, so they can't go see the other parent. The child's grades have been slipping since January because you stopped letting the child see her father around Christmas break. The school is starting to think she got a learning disability. You know why your baby's grades are slipping. Her grades are slipping because you are disrupting the relationship she has with the other parent. You know that. The child knows that. The school don't know that. So what's going to happen is she's going to end up in special education, getting an inferior education because you want to keep her from her mother or from her dad. Can we stop playing games with our kids?
All right, all right.
I'll give you another one. You have a black boy. You send him to a school up in a white suburb. Why? I don't know, because we crazy. That's why. But you sending a black boy, blue, black, purple, nappy head, big lips, broad nose, to a white school in the suburbs. He's failing out of school when he was straight A's in the ghetto. And the school wants to test him because they think he needs extra help. You got to be careful when they say extra help, because they don't like to say special education because they know that your blinders go up, so they call it extra help. You let them test your child. Now they're calling your son, who was straight A's and B's in the hood, mildly mentally retarded. And you let them, because you don't want to accept the fact that he don't want to be out there and they don't want him there. And they are socially castigating him until you decide to take him out. I get calls from parents every day. What should I do about my son who's in a predominantly white school and struggling? The answer is real simple. Take him the hell out.
That's right.
That's what you do.
Yes.
Many of you leave them out there, not because it's in the best interest of the child, but it makes you look better.
Right.
See, it's a social status symbol amongst Negroes to brag about the fact your child is in a white